There's a pretty one, Ulysses. There it is.
Hello, BookTube. I'm Shawn Breeze Books, and I'm here for a fabulous discussion with a fabulous interlocutor. This is Chris from the Fabulous. How many times can I get fabulous in the introductory sentence? Book podcast, the Book Cougars. And we'll get into how this all came about. But this is a pseudo buddy read type of discussion about the Sarah Waters novel from 2002, Fingersmith. And this is my edition, which is the tie-in edition, the movie, or I guess miniseries tie-in edition. And you've got a lovely new one there, Chris.
The new one. I bought this one so I could write in it because we also have, Laura, my wife, and I have this old beat-up edition that I've had to tape together because it's been read so many times.
It's been well fingersmithed.
Yes, indeed.
Chris, tell everybody how this all came about.
Thank you, Shawn, for inviting me on. It's fabulous to be here. This all started because I, early on in getting to know Shawn, discovered he does not like crime fiction, genre fiction, as he refers to it. So I challenged him. I said, hey, if I chose one, would you read it with me? Would you, buddy, read it with me? And let me try and change your mind about the genre. Fingersmith is what I came to because I thought it's literary. It has that 19th century flavor to it, obviously. And it's Sarah Waters. She's a big deal.
Absolutely. And in subsequent conversations, you found out that I had tried a Sarah Waters novel and bailed on it. What was that one called? The Little Stranger. But anyway, I just didn't care for it, and so I didn't finish it. And so then he said, okay, that's it. We're going to buddy read Fingersmith. Darn it all.
Yeah, because Sarah Waters, I love her earlier work, but I don't appreciate her later, more recent novels. I did listen to Little Stranger. Laura actually read it when we were on a road trip. And then The Paying Guest, I lugged a copy home from Germany, actually, because it came out earlier there. And it's a thick book. It was a hardcover. Lugged it home, ended up not reading it. Laura didn't read it. That was the end of our love affair with Sarah Waters.
So you just loved her when she was young and hot.
I loved her when she was into Victorian literature. Yeah. I think for me, it all has to do with the time period because I love the Victorian time period, Victorian literature. And this one in Tipping the Velvet, it was like a dream come true to read a 19th century novel without lesbians. Without lesbians who are out. There's how to say it, right?
Without lesbians. That's right.
With lesbians who are out. None of that are they, aren't they kind of speculation that you sometimes have with classics.
I have double checked. It was The Little Stranger that I tried. And I read anything exciting for a bail review. I also did it on audio, and I have yet to give a flying you-know-what about anyone or anything. I'm pretty sure I'm supposed to have by now. And then about the audiobook. Oh, and Simon Vance should not be allowed to narrate any post-Tudors story. The pomposity of his voice is just staggering. But anyway, enough about that. So for Fingersmith, I would say what's the term for fiction set in the Victorian era, but written in more modern times with more modern themes? Neo-Victorian, I guess we would call this a neo-Victorian novel. I don't want to be waving pompous terms at you, but that's what I've heard. Set there, but addressing themes that a Victorian writer would never address. And this novel certainly does. And I guess it's a crime novel. We almost can't even talk about in what way it's a crime novel without spoiling it. So let me say right now that this is a novel that's very easy to spoil. So I would say the majority of this discussion is going to be behind a spoiler wall. We're going to be very careful about not spoiling anything. And then fairly early in the chat, I will announce that we're about to move into spoiler territory, and you, the viewer, can govern yourself accordingly. But it is a very plot-heavy novel that, you just get a big surprise fairly early on.
And please do take the spoiler warning seriously, because the joy of this book is really the unfolding of everything. So if you have the slightest interest in reading it, if you haven't yet, pause when Shawn puts up the spoiler wall and then come back to this video after you've read the novel.
Yes, and I did it almost exclusively on audio. I have had the print copy, but I thought the audio version was wonderful and really easy to follow. I would occasionally pick up the book to make sure that I got all the nuances of the plot, twists, and so on. But other than that, I just found it a delight to listen to by whoever that
Juanita McMahon.
Juanita McMahon.
I listened to it as well this time around. I did do some dipping into the book and actually had the e-copy and did some audio. And the audio is like over 23 hours. So this book is a chunkster. And I found that her voices were fantastic.
Absolutely.
I really enjoyed them, but some of them were hard for me to listen to after a while. And I don't know if it's because I was sick and listening with a head full of unpleasant things, or if it was just too much voice for me to handle.
Oh, okay. Do you remember whose voice that was?
It may have been Sue's and Mrs. Gosh, what is her name?
Suxby?
Yeah, Suxby.
Okay, interesting. I didn't have that.
May have been. Yeah, I'm not 100%. I'll have to dip back into it and see. But yeah, it's more of the, is it the Cockney accent? Is that what it is?
Yeah, I'm not very good about accents, but the accents were wonderful. Putting labels to them, I'm not so good at. I know Chris is dying to hear what I thought.
I am.
So I guess let's go to that. So this was a 5-star read for me. I'm really glad I read it. I did love it, because that's what a 5-star read means to me. Ultimately, it's not my kind of novel, but I appreciated it so deeply in spite of that. And I can't even point to any major flaws. So I was hooked from the beginning and really enjoyed it all the way through. So thank you
so
for
happy to hear that.
making me read it.
Good. I'm so happy it worked out well, and I never give people expectation that they have to love a novel that I love. We know that everybody is so different in their tastes and when they read a book and whatnot, but I'm really pleased to hear that you loved it so much.
Oh, it was so well done. I'm a character-driven reader, and this was an incredibly plot-driven novel, and the characters were really well drawn. So that's the kind of plotty novel that I like.
Yeah, for sure. It starts with Sue, who is a young woman. She's, what is she, 17 or something like that at the beginning? I'm not really sure.
Yes.
And yeah, just immediately into her voice and into her environment.
How would you describe the environment in which we meet Sue?
It's a den of thieves, isn't it?
Thieves, London, 1860 or something, 1850.
Mm-hmm.
And very reminiscent of Fagin's Den of Thieves in Oliver Twist. So I immediately thought of that, even though I'm not sure I've ever read the book, but loved the movie. And she has grown up there under the motherly care of Mrs. Suxby, who is the matron of the house and is really quite protective of Sue and made sure she didn't get into any of the trouble that would befall a young woman in such an environment. But we soon find out that there is a plot, in the other sense of the word plot, afoot. How would you describe that plot, Chris?
So Sue, being raised by Mrs. Suxby, she takes in babies, unwanted babies, and raises them or sells them. She doesn't really keep them around, but Sue is one she has kept around. And there are other characters who live in this home, but in comes a character named Gentleman, who is the one who has this plot. He's like in his late 20s, I think. So he's still a pretty young man. And he has been trying to find an heiress to marry and make his wealth that way. And he's had a couple relationships that almost got to the point of marriage, but then something happens and it crumbles. But now he has this new plan that involves Sue to try and make an heiress fall in love with him. And so Sue is going to be the inside man, and they train her to basically be a lady's maid. It's a crash course.
Yes, the training sessions were quite fun to read, where there's a really gruff gentleman trying to teach her how to do all those lovely upper-class feminine things. And he already has his foot in the door at a new estate. It's out in the country. The heiress is named Maud. She lives with her bachelor uncle. And he somehow wormed his way in there in terms of a connection with the uncle and has already made acquaintance with the young Maud, who's similar age to Sue, or is she a year or two older maybe?
Maybe just a year or two older, not much though.
Well,
So Maud is living with her uncle, who has this ongoing literary project that he's been working on for decades. And Gentleman comes along and he's posing like a framer to frame prints that the uncle is also interested in having framed. So that's how he weasels his way into the home.
That's right. And then the ultimate, and this is not a spoiler because we learned this in the opening pages, the ultimate strategy or the ultimate plan that Gentleman has is he's going to marry Maud and then within a few days have her committed to a mental institute so that then he will become the heir. So that's his plan. And then he'll give Sue a generous cut of what he inherits. They'd have to wait until the uncle died, but that was the devious plot.
Yeah, because Maud had money of her own.
Oh, okay.
That her uncle didn't control.
Oh,
but
that's
with the uncle out of the picture, she inherited his estate and everything. But she had to be married to inherit her money. So to have Sue there to be working on Maud, to fall in love with Gentleman, and then marrying Maud, but then sticking her in an insane asylum and getting her out of the way, he would have been free to have her money.
That's right. How would you describe Sue's personality? She's quite endearing in an interesting way because we know from the beginning that she's there as a pawn, but she's quite lovely.
She's very lovely. I think she's naive and I think she has a good heart. And I don't think she understands a lot that's going on around her. She's been raised in this den of thieves. People come to Mr. Sugsby's husband's shop, which is a front for stolen goods, and thieves come to sell things to him that he then redistributes. So this is what she's brought up in, is that people steal and people take things, and that's how you survive and live. And there's kind of love infused with that. She, I think, thinks Gentleman just has a bigger plan for a bigger payload. And I don't think she realizes it, while it takes her a while to realize the human implications.
Absolutely. And I think that Sarah Waters did a masterful job in showing the contradictions in Sue, because she eventually starts to really care for Maud and really like her. And it's not a spoiler, but we'll get to the other part of the story in a minute or two. At the same time as she's dreaming about getting this money that's going to involve major duplicity and betrayal of Maud. And I just thought that was so subtle that it could have been really melodramatic, but this was just finely nuanced.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's one reason why I'm hesitant to watch the video. I got it out of the library. It's Acorn Media, so if people subscribe to that service, they could probably stream it, because the novel is so lovely that I'm just hesitant to watch somebody's adaptation of it.
I hear you. And eventually, that connection between Maud and Sue becomes romantic and erotic. And that was also done in a very lovely way, didn't you think?
Absolutely. In the first section, yes. The first section is all from Sue's perspective. So I don't know if you mentioned there's 3 kind of main sections of the book. Yeah, and so that first one, there's my buddy visiting. The first section in Sue's voice, like you get everything from her perspective. And again, like you can see as a reader what's going on a little bit more than Sue can, I think. But you're still mainly with Sue.
That's right. So let me press you on that with a question. This is a non-spoilery question, but how much can you remember your first reading? Was it, 20 years ago?
Yeah, Laura read it first. And if I may tell this quick story, we were on vacation and it was the evening, we were in bed reading, and she was reading Fingersmith. I don't know what I was reading. And all of a sudden, she throws the book across the room. It hits the wall and splats on the floor. And I just looked at her because she's like the least violent person I know. She is not violent at all. And I was shocked. I was like, what is going on? She's, I just can't believe what just happened. And she stomped over, picked up the book, and just promptly sat down and kept reading. So I was like, wow. Because I think at that time I had already read Tipping the Velvet. and then possibly her other one, which I don't remember the name of it. It's also about a woman in an insane asylum. I don't remember. Anyway, but so when I finally got to it, I had the same, I didn't throw it across the room, but I was just like, wow, did not see that coming at all.
Absolutely. And we have piqued many people's curiosity. So hopefully by now they've already got their hands on the book and have started reading because it's incredibly well done. And so Sue is at this country estate and has gotten to be quite close to Maud. And then Gentleman comes there, as was the prearranged plot. And by this point, Sue is quite invested in a genuine connection with Maud, and the plot of the conspiracy comes to the fore. So she's conflicted, but she does her job. She coaxes Maud into receiving Gentleman's romantic attention, and they become engaged. Then they elope, and she sneaks out with them. And then they go. Where do they go? Actually, I think the place they go is also where they elope, and that's at another
a small country church that's, I think, really dilapidated and everything. And the law is that you can't marry in a village unless you've lived there for 15 days. But of course, Gentleman finds somebody who he could bribe, basically, and take care of that. However, they do spend a fair amount of time, several weeks, as two of the characters switch places physically and outwardly in their dress.
Yes, and the part of the plot is that in order to get Maud committed to a mental institution, Gentleman does a whole bunch of kind of devious stuff involving other people to indicate that he's really concerned about his new bride's mental health, and has doctors come, and Sue is involved in this conspiracy to certify that she needs to be committed. And this is done without Maud really realizing it.
Yeah, Maud, we should say too, she has wanted to escape from her uncle's home. So it's not that she's some innocent torn away from her uncle. She is happy to get away, but she's worried about what's coming because she's also having feelings for Sue.
By this point, the relationship between Sue and Maud has become sexual, and the intensity of this duplicity is heightened because of that.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
So they're staying at this skanky inn, and Maud is losing weight and looking awful, dressing poorly, and Sue is really happy to be wearing some of these beautiful gowns that Maud has passed down from her. She's eating really well for the first time in a long time. So she's getting plump and healthier. So along comes the doctor to start doing the interviews. And how far of a spoiler do we want to give?
I think we could probably just leave it at that the doctor or doctors do certify that she needs to be committed, but Maud doesn't know that. And then they all get into the stagecoach or whatever they're traveling in. It's not a stagecoach, but Maud thinks they're going to London, but they're actually taking her to the asylum.
Yes.
Okay, we're about to get into spoiler territory here, right at the very end of that first section. So this is where, if you care about spoilers, and in this case, I'm not somebody who worries too much about spoilers, but for this novel, absolutely, as Chris said at the beginning, you don't want to spoil it. So go away, read the book, and come back. They arrived at the asylum, and what happens?
Yeah, so we're there in this coach. It's Gentleman, Maud, and Sue. They pull up. Sue's thinking like, oh my God, I can't believe this is really happening. Maud's going to be admitted. However, it is Sue who's pulled out of the coach. And she doesn't understand what's going on at first. And they keep referring to her as Mrs. Rivers. Yeah, Gentleman's last name is Rivers. So they're referring to her as Mrs. Rivers, as if she's married to Gentleman. And she's like, no, it's not me. I'm the maid. But the whole thing that Gentleman has orchestrated is to make Sue look like the plump, wealthy wife, and Maud looking like the kind of bedraggled, skinny maid. they're admitting her because they think that this lady thinks she's a maid and that her wedding night, there's something involved with the sex of a wedding or a marriage that broke her mind,
Yes.
and they're admitting her to be treated.
So that a day or two before, when she'd been interviewed by the doctors, she thought she was providing corroboration to the insanity of Maud, who she was trying to trick along with gentlemen. But in fact, she was being interviewed by the doctors at gentleman's behest as his delusional wife, who thought she was his maid. Yeah.
And Maud doing the same thing. Now, we should say they've only had sex one time, Maud and Sue, but they're falling in love, but they are both in on gentlemen's duplicitous plans.
And it
So
took me a while to piece that together in the next section. But I want to go back before we go much further, because I did mark this in section 1. And this is a bit of a foreshadowing, although it didn't make me think there was going to be such a plot twist. This is during one of the gentleman has come to the estate, and he's supposedly teaching Maud how to paint. And Sue is out there, and this is in Sue's voice. And there's just these few sentences. This is on page 110 in my edition. It's very early on. Sue says, "We were thinking of secrets, real secrets and snide. Too many to count. When I try now to sort out who knew what, and who knew nothing, who knew everything, and who was a fraud, I have to stop and give it up. It makes my head spin." And I don't remember anything else in that first part that was a foreshadowing, but that I marked it at the time, and now reading it, it was quite striking.
yes, and that was the fun part about reading this for the second time, because
Sure.
I've read like Tipping the Velvet like 5 or 6 times. I love that novel so much, but this is only my second time with this Fingersmith, and she does say the very first sentence, "My name in those days was Susan Trinder."
That's right.
So you think I didn't catch that either the first time I was reading it, but when you're rereading it and you know what's going on, you're like, oh yeah, because that is not necessarily her name.
And that harkens back to so much Victorian fiction where identity is destabilized throughout the plot of the novel. This novel made me think of Oliver Twist, but also very much The Woman in White by Wilkie Collins, which involves a similar kind of identity switching.
I do want to say that Sarah Waters, her PhD was in Victorian literature and queer literature, and I think she does such a great job of creating a 19th century world that seems believable.
Oh, absolutely.
It's so rich. So I don't want readers to feel like they're reading historical fiction that is somehow really obviously historical fiction. I just felt really immersed in this world, like you do with a Dickens novel.
Yeah, absolutely. It's very immersive. And I guess there was a couple times in the first section where I thought, oh, this is, or maybe in the second section that we're just getting into, where I thought, oh, this is too much like The Woman in White. But that was very momentary. No, it was its own original thing, building on that literary tradition.
Yeah. Can I ask you a question? Do you think for people who don't enjoy Victorian fiction, who don't have knowledge of the Wilkie Collins and Dickens and some of those classic plot lines, do you think people would enjoy this novel? Or do you have to be a little bit in love with that time period?
All I can do is extrapolate from my own experience, because I was, as we've already said, the reader who wasn't into kind of crime novels or this kind of thing, and I fell right into this. So I'm going to assume that somebody who isn't familiar with Victorian fiction might have the same experience. They just discover it in its own wondrous originality and not be so concerned with what it's building on. But did you have all that background when you read this the first time?
I did. I've since read more. You know what? Actually, though, I don't think I had read any Wilkie Collins before reading this, because it came on 2001,
2002.
I knew Dickens, and I knew more 19th century American led. I certainly knew about women being wrongfully imprisoned in insane asylums and the attitude of medical professionals, because So running throughout the book is this issue that Maud is not just living with her uncle, she's actually working for him on this project that he's working on. So she's a very literary woman. She writes and she reads well. And there's a line in the book when the doctor first takes Sue in that reading too much literature has basically addled her mind. He gets all sweaty thinking about women's colleges and how they're creating this brainiac generation of women. That is something that feminist scholars have really explored in 19th century and earlier literature. But then you also have this scene when Sue's in the asylum and they're trying to make her believe or make her admit that she's actually Maud. She grew up in the slums of London. She's illiterate. He gives her a slate and he says, I want you to write your name. She can't even do that much. And he wants her to write her life. And he says, you shall recover the use of your faculty of reason as you recover your facility with the pen. So women should have reason, but not too much reason. Women should know how to read and write, but not read too much. And then there's also the pen being representative of the phallus. And there's been hints when the doctor was first interviewing Maud and Sue that Sue was trying to do things with Maud that Maud did not condone. So it's very subtle, but it's in there too.
And I don't think we've explicitly said yet that this literary project that Maud's uncle kind of ropes her into, forces her to take part in. He has a vast archive and library of erotic pornographic literature.
Yeah.
Yeah. And did you say that already?
No, I didn't, but I just said he had a big project that he'd been working on for years, and this project is a huge bibliography of all known pornographic books. And yeah, and so Maud, and that's the thing too, Maud is known, as they say at one point, I think it might be Gentleman who says that she is known in all of the dark bookstores of London and Paris because when her uncle has other men over to view his collection or bring him more books, they have dinner together, and then Maud will read from some of these pornographic books. And so she reads really well. So men who are into this, there's this underground network. They all know about her.
Absolutely.
So she's infamous in that way.
And she reads very well. She's a good reader in terms of reading out loud. And so she also is exposed to a lot of the way men of the era wrote about lesbians and lesbian sex. And that is her frame of reference for this budding emotional intimacy that becomes sexual one time. I'd forgotten it was just one time, but that's right. It is just one time between her and Sue. At the very end of the novel, that becomes an issue. But I thought that theme of the way men constructed lesbian sex and lesbian desire in literature and the way it played out in this budding romance between Sue and Maud, absolutely fascinating.
Yeah, it really was another level of betrayal in some ways because that first night that Sue and Maud have sex, Sue thinks Maud doesn't know anything about sex and what happens on the wedding night. So then she starts showing her what could possibly happen. Maud knew about lesbian sex and she knew about sex more than most people alive at the time, probably based on everything that she had read in her uncle's library. But Sue seems to be completely innocent and going on instinct.
Yes, and she had it all worked out rather well, I think. It was natural.
Yes, indeed. Oh my gosh. But I think we've both read novels where women are imprisoned in insane asylums. And it's a frolicking, good fun novel, but it is also full of crime. And then Sue's treatment, the depiction of her treatment in the insane asylum is really hard to read. Just the abuse that she endures from the doctors, from the nurses. It's just pretty horrific. And I appreciated Sarah Waters going into that in some detail because you really come to understand then what was at stake for these characters and how vicious Gentleman is. And he may not even know the extent of the treatment that women faced in such an institution,
Mm.
but I just think it was important that she described things that they did to inmates.
And this is where the whole kind of neo-Victorian thing comes in, because a 19th century novelist wouldn't have shown the extremity of those conditions the way that a more modern novelist would show you something from that era. And yeah, there was some tough reading in there. And it kept occurring to me as I was reading that section that really, wherever Maud and Sue were throughout the novel, they were in captivity. They were imprisoned everywhere they were. And so this is very much about kind of the almost trafficking of women and the way that women are controlled by men and held captive. Their captors are not always male, but there seems to be a man behind it all somehow.
Yes, indeed. And it's really sad because Maud thinks that she's almost friends with some of her uncle's friends because one of the men is always, oh, you should come visit me in London. And then at one point, she does make her way to this man's bookstore. And he's like, what are you doing here? Like, you can't be seen here.
That's
And
right.
and he basically shuttles her off to another institution. So, like, women are definitely objects of desire and physical use and financial windfall. And it's just really sad. It's a very sad book, even though it has such a good feeling. I think with these characters who are so well drawn and their love and their desire and their hope, it's just at heart a very sad look at women's lives.
Absolutely. And unique in the sense that neither, and correct me if I'm wrong, but I think I'm right to say this, neither Sue or Maud was sexually victimized. Like they weren't raped by men, they weren't assaulted by men, but they still, the ways in which men screwed them over was
Mhm.
horrific.
Absolutely. Yeah, I agree. And it was all part of them being protected at a certain level because they were going to be needed for work. The uncle wanted to keep Maud pure so she could do her work and not be disturbed. And Sue obviously was loved so much because of the plan that was hatched when she was an infant, basically.
And oh my God, that was heart wrenching during that section where Sue is in the asylum where she is pining for Mrs. Suxby. And by this
Mhm.
point, we know Mrs. Suxby was the grand dame of the whole plot and had been using Sue in such a dastardly way. And Sue is just, oh, I want to get home to Mrs. Suxby because she'll take care of me. And it's like, oh, no.
I know. Yeah, that's her mother. That's the only mother figure she knew because she thought her mother had been hanged as a
Yes.
thief when she was an infant, basically. And you can see the scaffolding of the hangman's platform
Oh,
from Mrs. Suxby's upper window.
and I thought you were going to say the scaffolding of the plot of this novel because it opens with, doesn't it? It opens with Sue's memories, or was she too young? It was just what Mrs. Suxby told her about her mother's
Yeah.
hanging. And then at
Hmm.
the end, and this is a spoiler, but we're in spoiler territory, Mrs. Suxby gets hanged.
Yes, she does. And now see, this is the thing now about Mrs. Suxby even. She takes the heat for having stabbed gentlemen to death. But I don't think that she's the one who stabbed him. I think she actually has a moment of love for these two girls, for Maud and Sue, and
And
she takes the fall.
love and atonement.
Mhm.
Yeah. So she takes the fall for it because she has betrayed them both so horribly already. And who do we think did actually kill Gentleman at the end? Was it Sue or was it Maud?
You know what? I wonder if it could have been both of them. I'm not sure because so Sue comes in with the knife, and
Yeah.
the knife is there, and Maud picks it up, and everybody charges gentleman.
Yeah.
So you don't, I don't know. I'd have to reread it. I
Yeah.
haven't
Yeah.
gone back to reread it.
Not sure what happened here, but I'm pretty sure it wasn't Mrs. Suxby.
Yeah.
And
Yes, I don't think it was her. And he bleeds out and he dies a slow, maybe not slow enough, but a painful death. He sees his life leaking
maybe,
out.
yeah. And what a fascinating character Mrs. Suxby is, because
Mm.
she had this nearly 2 decade long plot in which she would be using these women. And then when Maud comes into the house and is living there and taking Sue's former role, and that confrontation, the way that Sarah Waters, because we know the truth, or at least we think we do, the truth is a very shapeshifty, tenuous thing throughout the whole story, but we know more about Mrs. Suxby's, all the devious things she's been up to, than Sue does. And then we're shown how Mrs. Suxby is responding to Sue's version of events. And she's struggling to be that motherly figure and not reveal how much she's at the root of all of it. And that was fascinating and so well done.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. She still has some humanity left. She's a woman in this man's world, right? And she's doing what she could to survive, Mrs. Suxby, and has this plan that comes up quite, maybe not even. Okay, so to back up. So what happens is the
Please
uncle,
explain it. I wouldn't dare try to explain this
well,
part.
it's so twisted because it made me think of something Louise Penny always says is that crimes of passion are one thing, but so many crimes are decades in the making. And I feel like this is a case of this crime has been decades in the making because the uncle's sister is pregnant and has a baby that she is going to leave with Mrs. Suxby. So the uncle's a young man now and he's chasing her down and they're trying to bring her back. And that woman is, we think, Maud's mother, but it turns out it's actually Sue's mother. And so Sue's mother and Maud are switched at birth. And we find out that Maud is actually Mrs. Suxby's own child.
That's right.
So Maud being placed with, and it was the uncle's sister who says, please do not let my brother have my child because he will ruin my child. And I don't know if it's in that moment. When the end, then, like when Shawn was just saying that Mrs. Suxby is trying really hard not to break Sue's heart, that Sue was just a pawn. And I think Maud also tries to protect her from knowing because
Oh,
Maud,
that also was so subtle.
yeah, and Maud doesn't know this until she's taken by gentlemen into the London slum and imprisoned there, basically. As Shawn mentioned, these women are always in some form of prison, not allowed to do what they want to do. And so it makes Mrs. Suxby a more complicated character.
Oh, yeah, it just gave me a headache. It was an enjoyable headache. Trying to follow all the. I wonder if I'm catching all this. I think I am, but basically, and we decided, Chris and I, before we started recording, that even though Maud is really Sue and Sue is really Maud, we weren't going to try and follow that through in terms of how we referred to them in the behind the
Right.
spoiler wall. But that is ultimately what the truth of it is. Huh.
And I think that's why they killed Gentleman. Because Gentleman, he's drunk and he's an arrogant jerk who thinks he controls everything. And I think he was going to spill the beans. One
Okay.
reason why he gets killed for that, because they're trying to protect Sue.
Interesting. So I will say here, that's going to be a wrap for Chris's and my discussion. We're taping this on December 29th. And just last night, I found out that Sarah Waters is having an on-stage chat for the Women's Prize podcast or something. Chris and I are going to both watch it, and we're going to come back just for some final thoughts after we've watched Sarah Waters talk about Fingersmith. But boy, Chris, I'm very grateful to you. I don't know if I want to read any more Sarah Waters, but boy, am I ever glad that I read this one. And in fact, now that we've had this conversation, I think I appreciate it even more.
Yeah, it's definitely a book you need to talk about with somebody who's read it because there are so many ins and outs and what did that happen? And oh my gosh, that was her and why?
This
And
actually means where I thought it meant.
yeah, exactly. And it did win. So it was shortlisted for the Women's Prize, known as the Orange Prize back then. It was shortlisted for a Man Booker. And it won the Crime Writers Award Gold Dagger for Best Historical Novel the year it came out. And CWA is a really great organization. If you look at their short lists and winners over the years of historical or straight fiction, it's like a who's who of mystery crime writers from the last decades. They started in the 50s, I think. So it's pretty good company she's with for being nominated for all of these fancy awards.
And I noticed you said straight fiction. I don't know what that is, Chris. What is straight fiction?
Oh, straight fiction. You know what? It's probably
No,
more of like a
I'm
theater
making a
term.
joke. I'm making a
Yeah. I was thinking historical fiction is like musical theater, and then non-historical fiction like straight, like nothing fancy happens. It's contemporary. Nobody breaks out into song or murder.
Why don't we leave it on that and come back in a month, Chris? I'm looking forward to us both watching this thing. I can't promote it here because it'll be over by the time this video goes up, but we'll come back for 10 or 15 minutes and see what we learn from Sarah Waters herself in conversation with Simon Savage.
The man himself. I am looking forward to this very much, and I'm so happy that you enjoyed the book.
Oh, this was delightful, and the conversation it brought it up from a 5-star read to a 6-star read. Just with you, Chris. Thanks so much.
Oh, thanks, Shawn.
So here Chris and I are again on February 2nd. We've both now watched the Women's Prize Book Club chat between Simon Savage and Sarah Waters. And here we are for a little addendum chat on what we got out of it. Chris, hello again, and tell us what you thought of that. I thought it was a lovely chat.
Shawn. It was a really good chat. Really enjoyed it. I just could listen to her talk forever. And I think I was struck by, oh gosh, where to begin? She was talking a bit about Tipping the Velvet, one of her earlier novels, and also writing lesbian characters into Victorian history more blatantly than they are. She was talking about how lesbians do show up here and there in legal documents or pornography and things like that, but to have fully developed characters who are lesbians, she said that they were a little bit like lesbian fantasy history. And I love that because it's exactly the vibe that I get. And I know a lot of other readers, especially her first 3, which were all set in Victorian England, different periods, but so delightful. And I think that should be a new genre.
Absolutely. I think by her, that was a speech act. Just by saying that, she's created the genre.
Yes.
The other phrase near the beginning that I noted was she was drawn to the lesbian potential of the Victorian era. And the further back you went with the Victorians, the stranger things were.
That rings a bell. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And a little bit later in the chat, I went back today and got it verbatim because I was struck by it. Simon asked her a really good question. What is the writer's responsibility to giving voice to queer folks back in history? And she thought that was a great question. And she was just musing on it. And she said, is it okay to pluck people out of the past and decide what their sexuality was and use terms that they wouldn't have chosen or weren't available to them? So that was answering that question with a question, but I just thought that was fascinating. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Comes up in with biographers and so on as well.
Yeah. And then it's important, like politically, to reclaim people from the past or to find people from the past or to look at them through different lenses and to be able to make the point and the argument and find evidence that we've always been here and we always will be, which is so important politically. But then also with identity, what do you do? How do you handle that in a respectful way?
And now my mind's jumping all over the place, but one of the places it's jumping is, do you remember, was it about 20 years ago, 25 years ago, when David Leavitt wrote a novel that was based on a member of the Bloomsbury group, Stephen Spender? Stephen Spender certainly had a lot of gay sex back in that era, but he eventually married, and at the time that Leavitt's novel was published, he was about 85 years old, and he sued David Leavitt, who's a gay American novelist, and he won. And they had to pull the first edition of that novel. I think it's called While England Sleeps or something like that. I'll put it up on the screen here. And he had to revise the parts about Stephen Spender because Steven Spender said it's my life. You can't put these kind of labels on what I was doing. That's not how I thought of it, or blah, blah, blah. Fascinating chapter in pure literary history.
Yeah, when Sarah Water makes the point is that she doesn't write in time periods where people can still be alive, where it's still living memory. So she wrote that one Night Watch that's set in the 40s, 50s, but then she's a little leery of that, which is quite true because you are dealing with people who might still be alive. And I think it's much better to go further back in time. And it's also important to not assume everybody was heterosexual. Marriage between a man and a woman does not imply or guarantee heterosexuality.
Absolutely. I want to prompt you to share your excitement about the fact that Sarah Waters is working on some ghost stories now, because I have another thing that I want to jump in on after you share that enthusiasm.
Oh my gosh, yeah. So one of the things Sarah talked about is that she'd been working on this novel for a very long time. She said she wouldn't say how long, and she just recently ditched it and put it to rest. And what she's working on now, she said, is she's never written short stories, and she has several ghost stories in mind that she is thinking about. So I was super thrilled about that because our theme this year for the book Cougars is reading ghost stories. I know Sarah's not going to get them published this year. That, would probably be too wild. But I was really excited to hear that because I think she'd write some excellent short stories. She does creepy so well.
Exactly. And where mine just went a minute ago is Sarah Waters, if you're listening, here's an idea for one of your stories. A character that you are writing about and you make out their lives to be queer in a modern sense comes back to haunt you, to contest what you're writing. Wouldn't that be a fascinating story?
Interesting.
Maybe.
Maybe.
I was intrigued to hear that there is a new film from Korea that has adapted Fingersmith and set it in the 1930s colonial Korean era.
Yeah, yeah. And what was the name of it? I don't think I wrote it down.
I can pull it up here in 2 seconds. So
She said it was really well done. It's just very the same plot, just different time period and different cultural location.
The Handmaiden is what it's called.
I'll have to look that up. And I did not watch the adaptation of Fingersmith. Remember how I mentioned I had checked it out of the library and I decided not to watch it. I wanted to just have the novel lingering for now, but maybe it's something I'll do this summer when I have more time.
Yeah, it'll always be there for you.
Yeah.
I think we talked about The Woman in White by Wilkie Collins, that the plot kind of mirrors that, and she talked a bit about that, which was interesting. Also, I think I said in our earlier chat that the world of Mrs. Suxby in that house reminded me of the Oliver Twist story. And she said there was a touch of Fagin in Mrs. Suxby's world. So I thought, yes, I did pick that up.
Yes. Yeah, and I like what she talked about with the houses in her fiction
Yes.
being like microcosms of society, which gets to ghost stories. The haunted house is such a great tradition in looking at society and what's going on.
She also mentioned that there was a famous Victorian era book collector who had a massive porn collection, Henry Spencer Ashby. And that was the model for Maud's uncle. And when he died, he bequeathed his entire library to whatever institution. And the condition was, if you're going to take my collection, you have to also take the porn collection.
Yes.
And I think she talked about going into that library to look at those volumes. Yeah.
Yeah, and now they're very grateful that they have that because archives have to be selective and libraries have to be selective because there's only so much space. But in the past, they've not collected certain things like pornography because of the social mores of the time. But to have that information really opens up the Victorian era in a different way than if you had just been looking at their newspapers or the books that the library decided to carry. I wanted to talk about one more thing before we go, though.
Oh,
And
sure.
getting back to the plot, somebody asked a question about, I don't know if maybe it was Simon who asked her, does plot or character come first? And she said plot does, that she really plots things out and then takes it from there. And really, once she has the plot set, really likes the technical challenge of making it work and creating characters. And what did you say, Shawn? You said it perfectly.
Because I'm a character reader, and what she said was that then the challenge was she had to make the characters do what she wanted, and then the nuances of the character development came from how they felt about it, which I thought was very interesting. In my Friday reads this week, I talked about a lot of the stuff that she said that wasn't specifically about Fingersmith. And so I did share that. And I got a comment from one of your fellow bookish podcasters. It's Sarah Kay from the Bookcast Club podcast. I love her, and she's very opinionated. She said, that was some interesting info about Sarah Waters regarding her story structure coming first. I've always found her characters' relationships a bit unbelievable. Maybe this is why.
Oh, that's interesting.
Yeah.
See, I had the different take from that because I thought that is fascinating. And I think she is known for intricate plots.
Yep.
And I thought that I have loved so many of her characters, like deeply love them. And I thought that is really interesting that she could make such well-rounded characters who you feel something for, whether it's admiration or affection or hatred, because she does write a villain pretty well as well. So I was impressed by that it is a very technical skill that she's talking about to carry that out. But then to create characters with such humanity and feeling, I thought was pretty amazing.
Oh, I thought the character work in this novel was superb. Absolutely.
Yeah. Yeah.
And she would come at it that way, get the skeleton structure first, very intricately plotted, and then make the characters do what she needs, and still to have such three-dimensional characters was
Yeah.
something.
Shawn, I have to ask, what Sarah Waters will you read next?
I don't know, but I'm up because I'm not that familiar with her work. Should I go back, for example, to Tipping the Velvet? I think that's where I'm at. Yeah.
I was leading the witness.
Yes, I will. I don't know when, but I will.
I love that one so much. And that's one I've read half a dozen times probably to try and figure out how she creates the effect that she does.
Thank you for leading the witness. And this was a great two-part discussion, Chris. Thank you so much.
Oh gosh, thank you, Shawn. This has been so much fun.